Thick clouds hover on the gray horizon, giving the impression that the day is completely saturated with darkness. The wind, cold and piercing, carries the unpleasant smell of humidity into the air. There was dead silence all around, as if the city stood still in anticipation of something inevitable. Fatigue and depression were visible on people's faces. Suddenly, several people appeared on the streets, one of whom handed someone a couple of bills. The man who handed the money to the young guy apologized in a lifeless voice for the fact that the amount was small. He said that the money for demolishing the house is divided among everyone. Next to them also stood a sad, tall woman with a small child in her arms. The young guy standing opposite the man and woman is called Charlie Green, and the people who handed him money were his aunt and uncle, Henry and Laura Frost. Charlie was raised by his grandfather because he lost his father at a young age. And the building, which was planned to be demolished in the near future, actually belonged to his recently deceased grandfather. Charlie's grandfather has been a huge thorn in the side of real estate developers for years. And now that grandfather is gone, developers instantly flocked like hungry kites. They immediately began demolishing the house. But suddenly someone disrupted the long-awaited demolition of my grandfather's house. Someone threw a huge number of firecrackers right in front of the developers' faces in order to thwart their plans. But the developer already thought that the house had already been demolished, but he was dumbfounded by Uncle Charlie, Henry Frost, who dared to set off firecrackers right over the developer's head. The developer was filled with hatred and anger. Grandfather's relatives immediately came together to protest to stop the developers from carrying out their sinister plans. Grandfather only recently said goodbye to life, and developers immediately began to mock his descendants and property. How could they even think of destroying someone else's house so brazenly and quickly? Protesters carrying shovels, sticks, and other equipment gradually surrounded the group of developers, significantly limiting their freedom of movement. The developers were dumbfounded by the people's actions. Suddenly, one of the developers came closer to one of his colleagues and whispered in his ear that their boss had ordered that in such situations, they immediately solve the problem with money. After all, you can pay a small amount in order to pay off indignant people, and then receive a huge profit from the same place. Profit was the only thing that guided these developers at that time, and given that both sides were hungry for money, they quickly deleted the issue. The funny thing is that the developers were so afraid of the failure of such a profitable deal that they paid people all the compensation in cash at once. Thus, the division of money received from compensation began between grandfather's relatives. Relatives offered Charlie only a few hundred of the entire amount. True, Charlie still refused this money, saying that he did not need it. Charlie then added in a monotone voice that although his grandfather always took care of him, all his relatives also helped him a lot. And Charlie initially did not pretend to anything. Charlie thought it would be enough for him to simply take something from the house that would soon be demolished, and the relatives were only happy. In their eyes, Charlie was a stupid and naive child who made them a huge concession. After all, they were primarily concerned about money. Charlie entered the house. There was dead silence in the house, as if time had stopped. The furniture is covered with a thick layer of dust, giving the impression of abandonment and loneliness. Cobwebs weave in the corners of the rooms, like a fabric of time that slowly envelops each object. Charlie was puzzled by the picture he saw. Not only did the relatives greedily take all the money for themselves, but they also took all of the grandfather's property out of his house. Except that on one of the shelves there lay a lonely yellow book, which had long been covered with a thick layer of dust. Charlie's gaze immediately fell on this book, probably because there was nothing else left in the house. Suddenly, Charlie plunged into his childhood memories. After all, Charlie grew up in this house. Every corner was familiar to him, and he knew everything about this house. Lying on the bed already in his home, Charlie carefully examined this book from all sides. He was very surprised that having lived in his grandfather's house for so many years, studying every centimeter of the house, he had never seen this book before in all this time. Charlie interestedly opened one of the pages of the book. It was written there that a winding path leads to a secluded place. The forbidden water of wisdom flows, the borrowed wind howls, the fog creeps in, the prayers of the clear sky roar, and the prayers of the rain rush down. Gradually, Charlie began to understand what the book was about. Most likely, it is about the 70 techniques for transforming the earth that were used by Taoist practitioners. Charlie had the idea in his mind that these techniques were not very real. He always thought it was some kind of fiction for children. And even if something like this actually exists, it is clearly not connected with magic, because magic does not exist. Charlie flipped through the page. The second page showed a rather frightening demon. There was also a caption under the image of the demon, which explained that this was the king of the monkeys. According to the 72 transformation technique, He has a wide range of different abilities. For a while after analyzing what he saw, Charlie thought that this was a book about spirits and demons. Charlie continued to leaf through the book, but suddenly one could read surprise, disappointment, and confusion on his face. Most of the pages were simply blank. It all seemed like sheer nonsense. Suddenly, Charlie heard a strange sound. A sound similar to the ringing opera singing began to spread throughout the room, like a magical harmony absorbing Charlie's reality. Each note rose in the air, creating an exciting atmosphere that immersed him in a world of sounds and elemental beauty. It wasn't just the sound. It was an emotional force that gripped his mind. Operatic high notes touched his body, causing internal vibrations. And Charlie's room gradually transformed into a space filled with some mysterious magical power. Gradually, Charlie seemed to begin to return to reality. He, feeling the long-awaited relief, walked up to the table, leaning on it. True, Charlie was not in a calm state for long, because suddenly he remembered that he did not have a table in his room. Moreover, Charlie was in his bed the whole time. Charlie looked up. There were not enough planks in one of the walls, so there was a hole through which the sky could be seen. Charlie was terribly confused. He could not understand where he was. Charlie never realized what was happening or what had happened to him. After all, during all that time, he only managed to close that book. Frightened, Charlie looked carefully at the pages of the book again, analyzing them with his eyes. Charlie read one of the pages, which said something about immersion in silence and solitude. True, this doesn't mean anything to Charlie. He still doesn't understand what it all means. The guy understood that it was useless to think for hours in search of the truth. It is much more logical and effective to leave the room and look at what is outside. When Charlie went outside and saw what was happening there, he became even more excited than before. The frightened guy hurriedly looked around. There were only strangers around, unfamiliar surroundings, unfamiliar music. Charlie even sweated with excitement, because he had absolutely no idea what this place was and how he could even end up there. In front of Charlie stood an elderly man in a very strange attire. He was selling some unusual sweets. Then a little girl, wearing no less strange clothes, approached Charlie. She handed Charlie a mountain flower so that he could buy it from her. Another man was already sitting on the other side of Charlie. He turned to Charlie, greeting him. Then the man invited Charlie to try the noodles he had prepared. The very pleasant aroma of freshly cooked noodles immediately brought Charlie back to his senses. The man moved the bowl of noodles closer to Charlie and wished him bon appétit. Charlie didn't even notice that he was already sitting at the table with a bowl of noodles. The guy was very confused, but also very hungry. The noodles were black and looked quite strange. Suddenly, one of the visitors turned to the owner of the establishment, who prepares these noodles. He told him that his noodles had completely lost their taste. And suddenly, the owner of the establishment, without any extra thought, did something that Charlie was not at all ready to see. For a moment, it even seemed to Charlie that this was all a dream or madness. The man tore off his own head and dripped a few drops of blood into the noodles. Charlie's heart began to beat at an insane speed from fear. Then Charlie's gaze fell on another terrifying sight. In the fire on which the noodles were being cooked, there were some skulls and bones. Meanwhile, some creature that looked like a small child extended a human hand to another vile creature, for some reason calling this hand a flower. This hand looked terrible. It was impossible to watch. In return, the creature held out something, calling it sugar plums. True, in fact, these were not sugar plums at all, but real eyes. It all looked like Charlie's worst nightmare. His hands began to shake and his teeth chattered. Charlie's knees were shaking. Charlie realized that this was not a night market. This is much worse. It is a ghost market. Charlie confidently walked forward, rapidly picking up speed. He was thrown into heat and cold. He was probably completely speechless. But suddenly Charlie's escape was interrupted. A cold and heavy hand took Charlie by the shoulder. Charlie immediately turned around and saw a tall man behind him, giving Charlie some noodles. And this man, being beheaded, held his own head in his hands. The owner of the ghost diner wanted to remind Charlie that he had to pay for the noodles. Charlie was confused. He continued to look towards the owner of the ghostly diner with a confused expression on his face. The owner screamed that it couldn't be that the guest didn't have money. All the ghosts, skeletons, and other evil spirits stared at Charlie condemningly. Skeletons covered in rags of flesh walked slowly, emitting ominous creaks, and the empty eye sockets of their skulls seemed like endless black abysses, ready to swallow everything bright around. The owner of the diner put his head back in its place, and then sighed, saying that it was all not so important. After all, Charlie could pay differently. Charlie repeated the last words of the owner of the diner in a trembling voice. He was very worried about what the owner meant by, "Pay for dinner." Charlie was terribly scared. The owner of the diner demonically looked at Charlie and in an insidious voice invited him to pay with his heart, liver, spleen, lungs, or kidneys. He asked Charlie what he would choose from the options presented. The ghost suggested these options for a reason. It's just that in Chinese medicine, it is traditionally believed that there are 5 internal organs that contain qi, or vital energy, and the ghost listed exactly them. The ghost thought that Charlie's eyes looked especially charming. Goosebumps instantly ran all over Charlie's body. He still dreamed of suddenly waking up and forgetting about this whole nightmare. Then one of the ghosts told Charlie that his hands looked just fine, and then he chuckled wickedly. Charlie thought his end was near. Ghosts surrounded him, not allowing him passage. Suddenly a tall man in a hat appeared from the crowd. He shouted, asking to be given the way to go to the boy. He handed the owner of the ghostly diner some pieces of paper, saying that this should be enough. He decided to pay the cost of the noodles instead of Charlie. The man quickly grabbed Charlie by the hand and took him aside away from the ghosts. The two of them were quickly walking somewhere. The mysterious man told Charlie to follow him and keep up. The ghosts began to look around, trying to find with their eyes the boy and the old man who had taken him away. Meanwhile, the mysterious stranger continued to quicken his pace in an attempt to lead Charlie away from the crowd of ghosts. Suddenly, Charlie stopped and looked around cautiously. The ghost seemed to be no longer visible. Charlie glanced at his savior. He didn't look like a ghost at all. He looked like an ordinary person. The mysterious man turned to Charlie and looked displeased at the carefree boy. The mysterious man suddenly took some kind of stick and gave Charlie a good slap in the face and started yelling at him. He asked how Charlie could be so careless and enter the ghost market. If it weren't for this man, these ghosts would have dealt with the young boy long ago and put his bones into the furnaces. Charlie looked pitifully at the mysterious man, began to bow to him and thank him for saving his life. True, apparently, the man did not really appreciate this gratitude and again hit Charlie on the head with a stick. The man was very surprised by Charlie's gratitude. He said that he did not need any empty words. The mysterious man glanced at Charlie again. In this look, one could read many different emotions at once: condemnation, misunderstanding, sympathy, pity, ridicule, and regret. Then the mysterious man asked himself rhetorically what he could take from this boy who had nothing anyway. So the man told Charlie to move on. Having already moved a few meters away from Charlie, the mysterious man suddenly stopped. He turned to Charlie again, asking him why the boy was still standing still. Does he really want the ghosts to eat him? Charlie looked anxiously at the mysterious stranger and admitted that he had nowhere to go. The mysterious man took a deep breath. He thought at that moment that since he had already started helping the boy, he needed to save him to the end. So the man turned to Charlie again and told him to follow him. At the same time, during the road, a mysterious stranger began to introduce Charlie to the history of this place. It was once a thriving market, but one terrible day a disaster befell it. During this, riots broke out, which led troops to that place. After 3 clashes, the living left the place, and now only ghosts hang around there. Charlie and the mysterious man had already approached a house. The man told the boy to come in. As soon as the door opened, Charlie was discouraged. In front of them lay several skeletons that had long been covered with dust. The mysterious man told the boy not to be afraid. After all, these are just bones. They cannot harm the living. For some reason, the mysterious man leaned right towards these skeletons, greeting them and calling them masters. The mysterious stranger then addressed these skeletons, saying that Charlie would stay with them for the night. Charlie, again not understanding what was happening, looked down in shock and fear. Then the mysterious man started grumbling. He told Charlie not to stand like a statue and helped him lay out the beds in order to get ready for bed. But Charlie still never ceased to be surprised by what was happening. Suddenly 2 ghosts appeared above Charlie's head and turned to this mysterious man. The old man, whose gray hair fluttered quietly in the wind, invited Charlie to sit next to him. After a short silence filled with the rustling of leaves, he spoke with a mysterious smile. He told Charlie that there are secrets in this world that defy time, and his Taoist name is one of these secrets. Through the years, he's been called by many different names, but the true essence of his being is hidden behind what his Taoist name represents. And the worldly surname of the mysterious old man is Li. Charlie felt the old man's words penetrate his consciousness like a key to a door hidden in the depths of time. He understood that before him was not just an old man, but a bearer of mysterious wisdom, ready to share his experience and knowledge with those who were ready to perceive the truth of the soul. As a result, the old man told Charlie to address him as Taoist Li. Taoist Li looked interestedly into the boy's eyes and asked what his name was. Charlie shyly and quietly said his name. Taoist Li looked at Charlie sternly, as if his eyes carried centuries of wisdom and experience. Slowly, he began to reveal to the boy the secrets of this troubled world. The world, Charlie, is not always what we think it is, Taoist Li began, his words penetrating the air with respect for time And Charlie, finding himself with him under this roof with me, should know that Taoist Lee is a tramp. He has nothing valuable, but he carries a lot within himself that is hidden from the eyes of ordinary people. Charlie listened carefully, realizing that in front of him was not only a strange traveler, but also a bearer of unknown stories. Taoist Lee's words sounded like the song of an old bard, transporting the listener to the world of mysterious lands. However, the next moment, having changed his atmosphere, he shouted aggressively and swung his sword as if scaring away the dark forces that could be reinforced by his wise words. The old man, whose gaze seemed lost in distant memories, slowly took out an ancient sword from under his old cloak. "Charlie," he said, "this sword has been my faithful companion for many years. It has witnessed many battles and lived through eras that Charlie could only dream of." Charlie, staring at the blade, which was covered in time with traces of battles and adventures, said that Taoist Lee should not worry, because Charlie was not the kind of person who harbored evil in his heart. Morning has come. The morning sun gently awakened Charlie as he slowly opened his eyes and felt the first rays of light on his face. At first he lay in the weightlessness of sleep, but as he returned to reality, a lazy play of muscles began. The first thing he did was raise his arms, experiencing a pleasant stretch, as if good morning began with a greeting hug. Charlie yawned loudly, as if letting go of the last remnants of sleep, and stretched out on the straw lounger. But instead of the expected comfort, his body responded with slight discomfort. The straw lounger ached every cell of his body. Charlie turned around, confused. His eyes slowly moved around the room, and to the boy's surprise, there was not a single soul in it. The silence was so deep that in the room you could only hear the quiet whisper of the wind outside the window and the slight creaking of wooden furniture. Charlie's gaze is directed into the distance. His expression is full of questions, and a mysterious question sounds in his mind. Where did the old man go? Charlie suddenly heard the sound of an iron shovel, which abruptly broke the silence. Charlie, while walking, suddenly noticed Old Man Lee, hunched over, diligently digging the ground with a shovel. The scene is under a huge oak tree, whose branches reach to the heavens. The old man, despite his age, looks concentrated, as if the task he is performing carries a special meaning. Each blow of the shovel fills the air with an orderly rhythm, as if the old man and the oak tree were engaged in an invisible dance with nature. Old Man Lee, suddenly interrupting his shoveling work, began to say sublimely, "Great beings of the 10 directions, their number is like grains of sand, transforming the worlds and saving all beings of heaven and man." His words sound like a call to the forces of the universe, filling the air with a mysterious, vibrating touch, and Charlie feels that something deeper is happening than just the old man's speech. Every statement of Old Man Lee contains not only respect for the worlds, but also an unknown wisdom that permeates the hearts of those listening. Old Man Lee suddenly waved 3 fingers in the air and added, "Combine your blessings to save the world with one voice." His words, imbued with majesty, create an atmosphere of sacred rapprochement around him, as if a moment in which every being, regardless of origin, can become part of a single desire for the well-being of the world. And while he was doing this, the image of a woman and a child suddenly appeared around him. Charlie stood to the side, his gaze fixed on Old Man Lee's actions. He carefully watched every movement, trying to understand the meaning and significance of what was happening. Only the quiet sounds of a shovel, periodic waves of 3 fingers in the air, and the old man's sublime words created an atmosphere of mystery and inner excitement in Charlie. Old Man Lee looked carefully at Charlie, asking him if he saw in front of him the same images that the old man saw. Charlie said yes. Then Old Man Lee smiled benevolently and good-naturedly. He decided to ask Charlie where he was going and where he had come from. Charlie began to wonder if he should tell Old Man Lee where he really came from. Doubts and fear intertwined in his thoughts, creating a labyrinth of doubts from which he found it difficult to escape. Charlie was confused as he searched for the right words in his head. Then Charlie felt the yellow book lying in his pants. Charlie already knew very well that if you need to look for answers to any questions, they are in this book. Charlie looked in the direction of Old Man Lee in confusion and alarm, trying to hide the emotion of confusion from his face. Charlie asked the old man where he was going. Old Man Lee grinned and said that he was going to Yulin. He stood majestically, like a guardian of ancient wisdom. His brown eyes glowed, reflecting not only his long life journey, but also the mysterious secrets he kept. Tall and broad-shouldered, he seemed to be in harmony with nature itself. Dressed in a white robe, the old man looked like a living portrait of time. Next, we moved to the suburbs of Yulin. It's raining outside. There was an elderly couple standing there. It was innkeeper Ron Winterbottom and his wife Agatha Winterbottom. They anxiously awaited the return of their son. And so Agatha and Ron heard someone's steps within a few minutes. It was their son who had finally returned. Behind their son stood a beautiful long-haired stranger who modestly cast a glance towards Ron and Agatha. Agatha asked who this girl was accompanying their son. The girl introduced herself. Her name was Theodora. She was from the town of Tse, which was very far from here. Her husband, unfortunately, died early, and they had no children. Therefore, her father-in-law and mother-in-law were unforgiving and kicked her out, and her parents were dead. So Theodora went to her aunt, but it turned out that her aunt was also dead. Theodora shyly turned away, numerous tears rolling down her cheeks. The poor girl didn't know where to go. It was also raining outside, so Theodora wanted to ask Ron and Agatha to be kind and let the girl stay just one night. Agatha carefully and kindly took Theodora by the shoulder, inviting her to the table. Agatha was not at all against helping a girl in trouble, allowing her to stay the night. The family was just getting ready for dinner, so Theodora could have dinner with them. Theodora smiled. Her smile was very mysterious and tender. After dinner, Theodora immediately began helping Agatha and Ron with household chores. She washed the dishes, washed clothes, and began sewing. Agatha admiredly thanked the girl for such valuable help. True, the girl replied that there was no need for gratitude because they were the ones who sheltered her and did not leave her in trouble. Agatha then looked at what Theodora had sewn. The old lady was simply dismayed at how good the young girl was at sewing. She said that Theodora's late husband's parents were such fools to throw out such a skilled beauty. Agatha, for example, could only ever dream of having such a daughter. Theodora began to say that if her uncle and aunt would not mind, then... Theodora paused without immediately finishing the sentence. The fact was that Theodora wanted to marry their son. The world was restless, and ordinary people were not very picky. Ron and Agatha hurriedly decorated the room, sending their newly made husband and wife into the room. When their son and Theodora were left alone in their own room, the guy, looking shyly down, sat modestly on the bed. Then he glanced at Theodora, who was closing the doors of the room. He asked his new wife why she needed a wooden bolt. The girl responded by saying that there are many robbers in the area, so you need to be more careful. Thus, the door to their room was tightly closed. Theodora approached her new husband, taking his hand carefully. She leaned towards the guy, looking him up and down. Then Theodora noted that if you look closely, her new husband's skin is indeed very delicate. After her words, the guy looked questioningly at Theodora. He even blushed with embarrassment. Then she moved even closer to the guy and gently whispered in his ear that she meant that he looked really good. The guy was shocked and incredibly embarrassed. He said that Theodora still looked much better than him. Theodora increasingly rapidly reduced the distance between her and her husband. The whole face of the timid and modest guy was covered with blush, and beads of sweat rolled down his face. Suddenly, a scream was heard in the house. Meanwhile, Agatha and her husband Ron were sleeping in their room. A screaming man called his mother in a trembling voice. Agatha quickly stood up and began to scream in fear because what she saw shocked her. Her son stood in front of her, covered in blood, without eyes. He started shouting to his mother that his wife was a demon. The screams also woke up Agatha's husband, Ron. After this, it turned out that it was not reality, but a dream. Agatha began excitedly repeating to her husband in the middle of the night that she dreamed that their son was standing bloodied and insisting that their daughter-in-law was a real demon. So Ron and Agatha headed towards the new husband and wife's room to make sure their son was okay. Agatha at the same time continued to tell her husband that, in her dream, their son said that he would be devoured. Ron looked at his wife in surprise and asked her if, on the contrary, she was not very happy with her new daughter-in-law. They came close to the door to the room of their son and his new wife, trying to listen carefully to understand what was happening there. They heard a terrible rustling and other strange noises, which greatly alarmed them. Ron and Agatha's faces showed shock, fear, anxiety, and fright. They couldn't figure out what it was. It seemed as if someone was holding their son inside. Agatha and Ron began banging on the doors, asking their son to immediately open the door and let them in. Terribly frightened, Agatha ran to call all her neighbors for help. Neighbors instantly gathered near the room of the newly made husband and wife. On the count of 3, they and Ron had to push the door. Together, they broke down the tightly closed door. It turned out to be not so simple. The entire floor in the room was bloody. There were bones lying around. Everything was turned upside down. All the people there stood in a stupor. It seemed as if they would all die at the same time from the fear that pierced their hearts. They all watched a terrifying picture. A huge black demon whose teeth were sharp like a knife blade and whose eyes glowed red smiled disgustingly, looking at the crowd and at the same time eating the son of Ron and Agatha. The demon continued to laugh disgustingly and evilly, without taking his eyes off the people. Numerous screams could be heard all around. Agatha held the skull in her hands. She could not come to her senses and realize what had happened. Suddenly her eyes rolled back. She was in a semi-fainting state. The demon rushed towards the crowd. Screams about this demon began to be heard in this area. Everyone began to shout that they had seen a demon, that a demon had eaten a man. Now we return to Charlie and Old Man Lee on their way to Yulin. Charlie sighed and told Old Man Lee that they had finally arrived. Old Man Lee handed Charlie some old worn piece of paper with the words that this might be useful to the boy in the city. Charlie took this piece of paper into his hands. Charlie glanced at the piece of paper. There was some text written on it that mentioned a certain Ernest Winterbottom. Charlie, turning to Old Man Lee, asked him who this Ernest Winterbottom was, to which Old Man Lee said that this was his elder brother. Elder brother in ancient China was the name of the eldest student. In response, Old Man Lee said that this guy was eaten by a demon. Meanwhile, the guards were checking Charlie's luggage. The guard said that everything was in order with the luggage. No problems were found. And so, Charlie and Old Man Lee had already taken a step to enter Yulin, but they were stopped by someone's menacing voice, which announced that entry was prohibited. Then they were handed a bowl and told to drink what it contained. Charlie asked anxiously what was in the bowl. The guard ignored the boy's question and poked the bowl in his face even more persistently and sternly. The guard ordered not to talk and to drink what was in the bowl. Old Man Lee, being bolder and more desperate, snatched the bowl to see what was in it. He said that there was nothing special there, just water mixed with flour. The old man took a sip confidently. One of the guards said that it seemed like Taoist Lee really had skills, so it wouldn't hurt for them to take a look at the notice board. The guard pointed his finger in the direction of this announcement. Charlie and Old Man Lee walked closer to take a look at what was placed there. Also on the ad, one could clearly see the image of some terrible and formidable demon. The advertisement said that capable and wise people were wanted to help this district in destroying evil spirits outside the city. And for a successfully completed task, a generous reward will be provided. Charlie again carefully analyzed the picture depicted in the ad. Charlie suddenly realized that this was exactly the kind of demon that was depicted in his grandfather's book. Finally, Old Man Lee and Charlie had already entered Yulin territory. While Old Man Lee left their temporary home to go get some wine, Charlie was lost in his thoughts. But a month flew by so imperceptibly after meeting Old Man Lee. After some reflection, Charlie looked around him and took out a book of his deceased grandfather from under his cloak. Charlie returned to the page where the demon from the ad was depicted. These images were truly identical. In addition, Charlie noticed another strange thing. The image of the demon in the book, which until recently had been in black and white, suddenly acquired color. Charlie was confused and bewildered. How many mysteries does he still have to solve? The thought suddenly crossed Charlie's mind that perhaps he should try to kill this demon. And maybe in this case, Charlie will finally be able to understand for what purpose and for what reason he ended up in this strange and frightening world. Old Man Lee has already returned, and one of the employees in that settlement set the table for Old Lee and Charlie. Charlie and Old Man Lee were getting ready to eat the food they had been given. Then Old Man Lee began to very enthusiastically and contentedly pour the wine he had brought into the vessel. At the same time, the old man said that you should only use the wine you actually brought, and to honor your ancestors, you need the best wine. Old Man Lee began to bow and solemnly shout, "For the spirit of the ancestors." Charlie inquisitively turned to Old Man Lee with the question of why he was bowing not only to his ancestor, but also to some mysterious talisman. Old Man Lee explained to the boy that this was a protective talisman from his mentor from the Endless Landscape sect. Therefore, it is obvious that Old Man Lee should bow to him. And now, after paying tribute to the ancestors, it was finally possible to start eating. Charlie watched Old Man Lee's actions carefully and discouraged all the time. The boy still couldn't understand why this old man always poured wine back into the gourd bottle from a young pumpkin, while he himself only drank cheap wine bought somewhere on the streets. Old Man Lee sniffed the vessel of wine contentedly. The aroma was very pleasant to him. Charlie still couldn't contain his inexhaustible interest, so he asked Old Man Lee why he couldn't just drink the wine right away, instead of using such a strange ritual beforehand. To this, Old Man Lee said that this fool does not understand anything at all. Old Man Lee took a sip, and then explained that having enjoyed the aroma, you will also enjoy the drink. Even one glass will be equal to the whole gourd drunk. Then Old Man Lee added that while he was shopping for wine, he heard something else. There are only 2 jobs in this city. The first is to go to Joe's house in the north, who is rumored to have problems with ghosts. Old Man Lee passed by this house. In his opinion, there was a fairly simple problem with a dead man. Then Old Man Lee said that he and Charlie would go to an influential family. Charlie, greedily eating his lunch, became alarmed at the old man's words and asked why he was in such a hurry. Old Man Lee immediately looked reproachfully at his young companion. He loomed menacingly over Charlie, asking the boy what was most important in the world to him. Charlie sighed with difficulty and looked at the old man wide. Charlie thought about the fact that he had been wandering around with the old man for a month. His skills seemed not too outstanding, and neither did his courage. But in anticipation of trouble and good fortune, he is good. After some thought, Charlie gave the old man his answer. For Charlie, this is defined as safety. Old Man Lee hissed at Charlie with displeasure, saying that his answer was complete nonsense. Food is what matters most. The old man told Charlie to quickly finish his meal and then go with Old Man Lee to earn food. Now we are transported to an alley near Jang's house. Suddenly, Old Man Lee shouted something about the Jade Dragon Talisman, holding a sword in one hand and pointing 2 fingers to the sky with the other. He pierced some piece of paper with this sword, muttering something under his breath. Then the awakening of charm began. Old Man Lee crouched down and began sniffing at something, lying right on the ground like some kind of sniffer dog. Charlie still couldn't get used to the tricks of this mysterious old man. The old man suddenly stopped and leaned back a little. Apparently he smelled something. Old Man Lee shouted what he had found. Old Man Lee sniffed again carefully and intently. Suddenly the old man cried out in disgust and leaned back. Charlie suddenly became very worried. Charlie began asking Old Man Lee what that stench was. Carrion? Or maybe a rotting corpse? Old Man Lee rolled his eyes and muttered that this was not carrion or a corpse at all, but nothing more than dog urine. Charlie grinned mockingly. Then Charlie, to fill the awkward pause, changed the subject by asking Old Man Lee if there were any spirits around, and if they were any danger. Old Man Lee replied that there is a small spirit here, Shushara. Old Man Lee and Charlie persistently and substantially prepared to go fight demons and drive out evil spirits. Charlie raised his nose proudly and, filled with fighting spirit and combat readiness, walked straight ahead. Old Man Lee suddenly took the boy by his cloak, telling this dunce that he had gone in the wrong direction altogether. Charlie was confused. He said that in order to go to that rich family, you need to go straight. But Old Man Lee said that in fact they were not going there, but to Joe. In that area, there were many people who were enthusiastically whispering among themselves. They discussed how they felt sorry for Joe's wife. Her husband was a quitter during his lifetime, and even in death he ruins her life. Old Man Lee confidently and persistently moved towards Joe's wife. The old man looked very menacing. He ordered the ghost to reveal his essence. People around immediately started screaming that they were seeing ghosts. They were very afraid of ghosts. The ghost appeared right in front of them. As soon as the little child standing next to Joe's wife saw his father, he immediately screamed and began calling for him. Joe's wife was also in shock. She was not ready to see her husband so suddenly, and in such a guise. The old man again turned to the ghost, saying that the ghost was still hiding his true essence. Old Man Lee screamed, and the ghost cast an alarmed glance towards the old man. Old Man Lee swung his sword again, wanting to make the ghost show his true nature. The ghost's face immediately floated somewhere to the side. His face began to rot and bleed. He looked incredibly terrible and terrifying. It looks like this ghost was beaten to death with sticks while alive. Old Man Lee looked menacingly to the side and began to mutter something under his breath. Sublime beings, directions, the number of which is like grains of sand. Transforming worlds, saving all beings of heaven and man, unite your good deeds to save the world with one voice. Taoist Lee cried out again. After the old man's spell, the ghost bowed his head in front of him. The old man thus saved the soul of this ghost. Wife Joe immediately ran up to Old Man Lee, bowed before him and smiled tenderly at him. She thanked the venerable Taoist for saving her husband and liberating his soul. She then handed him a basket of eggs as a sign of gratitude. She added that unfortunately her family is quite modest, so the only way she can give back is a basket of eggs. Old Man Lee looked at the basket, glanced at it, and at the same time he decided to take only one egg. Afterwards, he said that it was all nothing and there was nothing to worry about. Moreover, one egg will be enough for him. The woman looked at the old man in surprise. Suddenly, Charlie ran up to Old Man Lee. Charlie was very delighted and pleased with something, and he called Old Man Lee, after which the old man asked where Charlie had been all this time. Charlie jumped up and waved some piece of paper in the air. He then cried out that he had obtained a yellow scroll for the old man. The old man looked at Charlie in bewilderment. But suddenly the conversation between Old Man Lee and Charlie was interrupted by a man who grabbed the old man, begging him to save his master. He literally begged Old Man Lee for this help. This man even fell to his knees in front of the old man. He then said that he was the housekeeper of the Jang family. The man added that he had seen the venerable Taoist use his magical powers to save the Zhou family and found it incredible. Old Man Lee told the man not to worry. He said that he was a Taoist and therefore would not be able to allow evil spirits to run rampant. The old man asked the man to get up, and then he decided to go talk to Charlie. The alarmed man calmed down a little after talking with the old man. Old Man Lee immediately realized that this was all an idea of Charlie, who was the first to agree to help them. The old man aggressively grabbed Charlie, asking him what Charlie was up to. To this, Charlie said that Old Man Lee himself said that there was only a small ghost of Shushar, which means there is nothing to worry about. Charlie still couldn't understand, and wondered why some little spirit could be dangerous to them. Charlie then looked at the old man. He decided to ask Old Man Lee how much he had received from the Zhou family. The old man sighed tiredly and asked Charlie if the boy remembered what he taught him. Then the old man reminded that the goal of their sect is to help people, pacify evil spirits, and also fight demons. And you don't have to charge for it at all. Charlie did not really appreciate the old man's words, and said that they were running out of time, and at the same time, they still had no food. Finally, Old Man Lee and Charlie had already arrived at the Zhang residence. They were invited to enter. The old man immediately looked around at those around him. He thought that apparently this family had suffered a lot from that spirit. And although most looked exhausted, there were no signs that they were suffering from spirits or were sick. Old Man Lee looked curiously at one of the family's subordinates. Then the RN asked where Mr. Zhang was. Old Man Lee and Charlie moved closer to the doors. And now, standing at the entrance, the old man lightly pushed the door with his hand. And so, Old Man Lee and Charlie had already entered Mr. Zhang's possession. The gentleman's gaze made a strong impression on Charlie and the old man. His eyes were deep brown, they were wide open, and his gaze was generally piercing. The gentleman's heart was beating wildly as if trying to escape from his chest. There was a lump in his throat. It was difficult for him to breathe. The gentleman's hands trembled and his lips were tightly compressed with excitement. The alarmed, depressed, and broken state of the gentleman was immediately visible. The old man looked at Charlie, asking the boy if he saw anything interesting. The boy nodded. There was a small spirit sitting right on the gentleman's shoulder. The old man began to use his magic tricks again. He wanted to awaken the spiritual key talisman. Meanwhile, the Arizrak continued to sit on the master's shoulder. Mr. Zhang, nervous and stammering, wondered how difficult it would be to deal with this ghost. Old Man Lee took a deep breath and said that this would indeed be quite problematic. Because of the antics of the little nasty ghost, the gentleman began to feel some kind of delirium. He began to nervously repeat the question, asking who wants to kill him. The ghost leaned towards the master's face, and Old Man Lee said that the gentleman wants to kill his daughter. The gentleman became even more nervous. He asked Old Man Lee not to joke like that again. Old Man Lee asked the master if he really thought it was all a joke. Then came another question. The old man asked the gentleman if he had lost a single child in recent years. Mr. Zhang was even sweating with excitement. He clearly wanted to hide something. He muttered to himself that it seemed like he had no choice, but he still wanted to ask them to save his life. Old Man Lee began to deny that there was no way out. He then added that he was going to perform the ceremony. This was to be an altar-building ceremony. During it, Taoists call on ancestors and deities to help them. Charlie asked the old man if that little spirit was really so powerful that the altar-building ceremony would be useful. To which the old man replied in a downcast voice that he was not even sure that he could cope with this ceremony. Old Man Lee sighed. He said that how many times this baby was born in this family, but every time she was killed. With so many deaths, her anger is enormous. The surrounding people continued to discuss what was happening. They sincerely hoped that the Taoist master had a solution to this problem. The old man, standing confidently on two legs, looking menacingly to the side, decided to finally begin the ceremony. The old man ordered fresh breast milk to be prepared and mixed with powdered sugar. Breast milk with powdered sugar was the best way to attract the attention of a demon child. Why did he say that Charlie should lure the demon child away from Mr. Zhang? After this, you can get down to business. Charlie looked at the gentleman in alarm and asked the old man what was happening to the gentleman Zhang. To this, Old Man Lee said that everything was fine, but the gentleman should go to sleep. This little devil looked very unusual. Charlie was madly hoping that everything would go as it should. Old Man Lee began to cast a spell. God of the beginning, granter of forgiveness. 5 venerable primordial supreme spirits. The great innermost is reflected in 8 trigrams. 5 elders indicating fate from which you cannot hide. While the old man was casting a spell, something began to happen to the demonic child. The little spirit crawled towards the bowl of milk. The demonic child bent down in front of the bowl of milk to taste it. The magic gradually began to affect the demonic child. Old Man Lee and Charlie looked at the little spirit. They wanted to understand whether they succeeded in achieving their plans. They began to tie a rope around the demonic child to restrain him. At the same time, the ends of the ropes were tied to the nails. The nails had to be driven into the floor. Carrying out this work, Charlie breathed a sigh of relief. He was glad that his plan had worked. At the same time, Old Man Lee, raising 2 fingers right in front of the demonic child, continued to cast a spell. The light of the phoenix illuminates the heights of heaven, filling it with power. The ghosts take flight. At the same time, the demon child's head stopped swelling. All that remained was to wait until the end of the ceremony, and his soul had to be saved. Mr. Zhang looked at the whole picture. He became alarmed again and began shouting that he saw a ghost, pointing his finger in the direction of the small spirit. Charlie looked at the demon child, thinking that he and the old man had done a good job. The demonic child began to twist his head. He pursed his lips aggressively. His eyes were filled with anger and glowed red with rage. He screamed, breaking the ropes that were tied around him. The demon child suddenly flew up, heading straight towards Old Man Lee. The old man had already come to terms with the fact that apparently the end had come for him. The old man clenched his teeth and closed his eyes. But suddenly, for everyone, Charlie grabbed the throat of the demonic child and thus caught him on the fly. Old Man Lee was dismayed. He thought about the fact that Charlie could not only see spirits, he could even touch them. Thanks to Charlie's courage, and partly, Old Man Lee was saved and was safe. Meanwhile, Charlie himself continued to hold the demon by the throat, preventing him from escaping. But the demonic child began to resist. Charlie was worried about what else might await him now. The demon child hissed furiously, his eyes glowing red again. Moreover, this vile creature has grown sharp fangs. Suddenly, Charlie put his hand in his pants pocket. He felt for the candies that were lying around in his pockets back when he lived in his own world. He decided that these sweets would come in handy right now. He persistently tried to shove one candy into the demon child's mouth. Charlie thought that this should help him confuse the demon. And admittedly, this did distract the demon child's attention. While the demon was chewing candy, Charlie called Old Man Lee. Old Man Lee immediately responded and was ready to cast the necessary spell again. The first swing, crushing the earth. The second swing of the ancestor's sword. The third swing, expelling demons and ghosts for thousands of miles. The magical power began to penetrate the mind and soul of the child, leaving behind a noticeable mark. The child began to return to its former likeness, getting rid of the demonic essence. Charlie, Old Man Lee, all the people around them, with the exception of Mr. Zhang, who had lost consciousness long ago, watched the scene with pleasure and admiration. Now the evil spirit was finally driven out, and the child's soul was saved. All the living were also now safe. Old Man Lee noted that it was necessary to take the gentleman to his chambers. In the future, Mr. Zhang will simply have to rest and restore his strength. The subordinates of the Zhang family gratefully invited Old Man Lee and Charlie to the guest house so that they could rest after everything that had happened. Already sitting in the guest house, Old Man Lee told Charlie that dealing with such spirits as Charlie saw in person today could be really very dangerous. Therefore, if possible, it is better not to take jobs offered by influential families. Charlie listened carefully to Old Man Lee and then added on his own that the evil spirit did not particularly harm ordinary people. Perhaps he preferred the rich to the poor. Old Man Lee aggressively placed the cup of liquor on the table. He who sows the wind will reap the whirlwind. Under what rich man's house there are not several graves of his servants, and in the well the remains of girls? If we are talking about ordinary people, then in their case, everything will go as usual. But when it comes to a rich family, this can lead to ruin and death. Old Man Lee began to repeat over and over again that the richer and more powerful the family, the more evil spirits and evil spirits there are. Charlie at this time was surprised that despite his age, Old Man Lee was still very lively in some matters. Charlie then looked at the old man in surprise, and then asked what about that blue-skinned demon listed in the ad for which there was a reward. Old Man Lee asked if we were talking about a blue-skinned demon. Afterwards, Old Man Lee said that the demon that Charlie asked about was very fierce, and judging by that announcement, he is already in physical form, which means he is a developed spirit who has already become a demon. Charlie asked the old man what next. Charlie was thinking that Old Man Lee usually pretends to listen to him when he talks about such things, but why would he be so serious this time? Suddenly, a sound distracted Charlie and Old Man Lee from their dialogue. They could not understand where these sounds of trumpets and drums suddenly came from. They were discouraged and alarmed. They went outside to figure it out. In front of them stood a crowd of people with musical instruments. Among them was a man in a blue robe and a black hat. He bowed to Charlie and the old man, and then introduced himself. It was Yulin's magistrate, Chad Falani. He greeted the guests of their city. After that, he said that the blue-skinned demon was causing a lot of trouble in their city, so the residents could not sleep peacefully. The venerable master was not afraid to oppose him and risk his life for the sake of the people in order to eliminate the threat and return prosperity to Yulin. And he, Chad Falani, would like to express his gratitude and appreciation for the people of his city. In response to this, Old Man Lee became threateningly indignant. He didn't remember promising to get rid of the demon. Charlie interrupted the old man's words and said that his teacher looked up at the sky yesterday and said something. This demon has escaped from the underworld. He was lucky to get out, and now he wanders in this world in the guise of a woman, eating people at the same time. This is because after escaping he was weakened and exhausted, therefore, he had to resort to such deception. But now he has had his fill of human flesh. All the people around him immediately excitedly began to discuss the fact that even if he was full, this did not mean that he would stop devouring people. Moreover, even exhausted, he killed people. Charlie continued his speech. Yesterday he found out from local officials that it turns out that the demon prefers young boys and girls because they have very delicate skin. Now people understood why the demon ate the young guy from the Winterbottom family. People began to wonder what they should do now. Alarmed people surrounded Old Man Lee, addressing him as a venerable Taoist master, begging him for their salvation. At that moment, Old Man Lee was thinking that it was he himself who taught Charlie to intimidate with simple words. But the old man still couldn't understand why Charlie was doing this now. Charlie asked people for attention. He said that his teacher, Old Man Lee, is a true Taoist master from the Endless Landscape sect. Therefore, some small demon cannot waste the time of such a great and venerable master on himself. Then Charlie added with an adventurous grin that, nevertheless, he could handle such a trivial task himself instead of Old Man Lee. Old Man Lee glanced sideways at the self-confident boy, puzzled. Charlie wanted to get rid of the blue-skinned demon himself. That's news. The city magistrate said that what they say is true. A student is a reflection of his teacher. Mr. Filoni then respectfully asked Charlie when he planned to leave. To this, Charlie replied that immediately after he would return to the room with the teacher and prepare for this journey. Then, Charlie and Old Man Lee walked together into their guest room. The old man angrily took Charlie by the shoulders, wanting to scold him for such an outburst. The old man did not dare to look for that demon even with decades of practice behind him, and Charlie, who had not even stepped onto the first step of the Taoist path, was going to do it. It's like trying to overcome your own shadow. It's simply unrealistic. Charlie decided to object to his teacher. Charlie believes that he has no choice. He simply has to do it. To this, Old Man Lee said that he may be a teacher, but he is clearly not a teacher of suicides. Old Man Lee said that the talisman he taught Charlie is used by his brothers to hunt demons and evil spirits. At the same time, Old Man Lee is the only one who uses it to see them. His elder brother was always brave, laughing at Old Man Lee's cowardice, but as a result, Old Man Lee was the only survivor among his brothers. At an old age, his brother died anyway. Not even his bones remained. After hearing what he heard, Charlie was confused and decided to share his secrets with Old Man Lee. Charlie took out his grandfather's book, opening it to a page with a picture of a blue-skinned demon, and showed it to the old man. In his other hand, Charlie held an advert that showed the same demon. Charlie then commented on this, saying that this was the reason he wanted to meet this demon. Old Man Lee was amazed. Given that the same demon was depicted in the advertisement and in the book that belonged to Charlie, this demon was indeed closely intertwined with Charlie's life. Old Man Lee slammed the table. Then the old man added that if Charlie really wants to disappear, then let him do it. But in this case, Old Man Lee will simply pretend that he never had such a student. Charlie looked alarmed and upset towards his teacher, Old Man Lee. After a less exhaustive dialogue with the old man, Charlie returned to the magistrate and the people surrounding the residence. Charlie showed one of the pages he had torn out from his book about demons. There was a depiction of a weapon for exterminating demons. Charlie respectfully asked them to recreate it, and as soon as possible. The magistrate looked at the image and said it would be done. Charlie headed towards Ron Winterbottom's tavern. He already had the necessary equipment with him. Charlie saw an elderly, drooping man in front of him. He asked him if he was the innkeeper Winterbottom. Ron nodded. Charlie reflected that according to the magistrate, Ron Winterbottom was only 30 years old. But after what the man had witnessed, he looked like he was 60. How grief can torment a person. Someone screamed very loudly from the tavern. It was Agatha Winterbottom calling for her son. Ron Winterbottom apologized for his wife's screams. He explained that after her son was eaten by a demon, Agatha constantly begs for her son to be returned. Charlie looked carefully at Ron Winterbottom and asked him to tell him as much as possible about this demon. Ron began his story. This demon was turning into a young, beautiful girl, and he himself was huge and terrifying. Looking at him, it became incredibly scary. He deceived everyone and ate his son. It was clear that Ron Winterbottom was too scared to reveal any more information. Therefore, you can forget about additional evidence. Charlie then asked to inspect the room, who had killed the son of the Winterbottom family. The Winterbottom elders allowed Charlie in and asked him to follow them, warning him that Ron had boarded up that room. The room was indeed carefully boarded up, but they tried to restore access to it. There was a terrible smell in the room that instantly amazed everyone. Charlie told the people to stay here while he watched the room. The whole bed was covered in blood, and a disgusting and murderous smell was emanating from there. It looks like no one cleaned up there after those events. Charlie thought that the place was very suitable for spells. At this moment, Charlie decided to use everything that Old Man Lee had taught him. He used the Jade Dragon Talisman, then turned on the Awakening Charm. Charlie looked at the talisman, puzzled. Then Charlie ran out of the Winterbottom's property, gasping for breath. This stench was simply impossible, especially with the Awakened Charm. But within a minute, Charlie's excitement awoke again. He began to feel the essence of the demon. Charlie and the people accompanying him, with all the necessary equipment, were heading with torches in the direction from which the smell of the demon was coming. And so they came to some dark place. There were mountains, trees, and fog all around. It seems that somewhere in this place, there should already be a blue-skinned demon, because it was not without reason that the smell began to intensify. The people accompanying Charlie said that they were very tired, so they wished to return to this place in the morning. Charlie immediately thought that it was probably not worth involving ordinary people in such an adventure. Charlie said they could go, but at the same time asked them to tell Old Man Lee that he would be staying in this place for a while. People immediately fled. The full moon was visible in the sky, which at least slightly illuminated the path in such darkness. Charlie, looking straight at the moon, began to think that wandering alone at night hunting demons was really too dangerous. Charlie looked to the side. There he saw an abandoned temple and he could use a rest. Charlie entered the temple. The temple was abandoned so long ago that you can no longer tell which deity it was built to. Charlie looked up and asked the deity to allow him to stay the night and not be angry for disturbing him. Strange sounds began to be heard on the street. Charlie, meanwhile, was sleeping on the floor of the temple. But his light sleep was immediately interrupted by sounds coming from the street. Charlie began to look around, trying to figure out who was there. He asked whoever was there to show himself. In front of him, he saw a pretty fragile girl. She began to head towards Charlie and ask him to take shelter here from the rain. Charlie looked at the talismans that Old Man Lee gave him. They didn't seem to sound the alarm. This means that she was an ordinary girl and there was no danger. So Charlie allowed the girl to enter. The girl thanked her savior. Then the girl added that she was so wet from the rain and so cold. Then she apologized for the trouble. Charlie took out a robe from his clothes. He asked the girl to take it because it's easy to catch a cold in wet clothes. The girl picked up the robe that Charlie handed her. Afterwards, the girl said that she was the daughter of one of the Yulin families. She was out for a walk with her friends, but due to her carelessness, she got lost from them and got lost. But luckily for her, she met Charlie. Charlie then turned to this girl, telling her that she was extremely lucky that she had met Charlie, because she could have stumbled upon an evil spirit. The girl seductively straightened her robe, after which she made an alarmed expression on her face and asked Charlie if evil spirits really exist or if he was just joking. Seeing Charlie looking directly at her body, the girl screamed, showing emotions of embarrassment. In response, Charlie laughed and said that he looked there by accident. Charlie began to tell the girl that the magistrate hired him to get rid of the evil spirit. Then Charlie grinned and emphasized that it was already late. This means we need to go to bed early and go to Yulin tomorrow morning. The girl looked at the resting Charlie with a grin. Meanwhile, it was dark outside and heavy rain was falling. The girl's sweet and shy smile suddenly changed into a demonic one. She took off her robe, completely exposing her body. She began to approach Charlie, and then literally a minute later, the girl began to change her true likeness. Suddenly, not long ago, a sweet and pretty girl took on the appearance of a terrible and vile blue-skinned demon. The demon began to laugh evilly, looking at the sleeping Charlie. The demon continued to carefully examine Charlie's body, thigh, arms, back, or lower back. The demon still couldn't decide what to taste first. And yet, hovering right over Charlie, the demon made up its mind. He decided that the neck was an excellent option. However, it turned out that Charlie was not sleeping at all. He muttered to himself that the demon looked exactly like the illustrations in his book. The demon was outraged that Charlie was such a pretender. In addition, the demon was very surprised by the fact that he was depicted in the book that Charlie was leafing through. Suddenly, the demon realized that he had stepped on something. He looked down at his feet and saw Charlie's armor. The demon was a little surprised by this. He thought that if the boy used armor, then he had no talents. One bite, and he would instantly deal with the boy. But suddenly for the demon, Charlie took out his equipment, stopping the demon's plans. After Charlie used the appropriate weapon, the demon was significantly thrown back. True, Charlie still had to charm the demon's teeth in order to increase the time, because this self-propelled gun takes too long to ignite for a shot. The demon said that after the shot, he was in pain and itchy, but nevertheless, these are only small glands, which means they are not capable of causing him harm. But here the demon was mistaken. What happened greatly puzzled him and even shocked him. He could not even move. Charlie sighed with relief because the magic worked. Holding a huge axe in his hands, Charlie stared at the demon. He muttered to himself that there was not a second to waste. The action continues in the temple. Charlie leaned closer to the demon, who at that moment was trying to predict what the boy was going to do. Charlie looked at the demon with a puzzled look, thought for a moment, and then checked what spell he should cast. The sky is dazzling and the earth is harmonious, and thanks to the stroke of the demon, we will immediately perish. Charlie made a confident swing with his weapon. Charlie looked straight into the demon's eyes, trying to aim as accurately as possible. A terrible and loud sound sounded. This sound swept through the entire area. The demon was already lying without his limbs. Charlie bent over the body of the defeated man. Charlie then continued to deal with his enemy, sighing earnestly. Charlie was already finishing his work. Charlie was preparing to strike the final blow decisively and boldly. The boy accurately and persistently took the final step. The demon's head flew to the side. Why did Charlie take a deep breath and fall to the ground exhausted? Charlie was pleased with himself because he had done such a good job. But still, the wick of the self-propelled gun burned out for too long, so Charlie was saved only by his book. Why did Charlie try to find his book, wanting to check if anything had changed in its contents? Charlie walked over to the table on which his book lay. Next to her, he saw a demon hiding under it all that time. It was real human skin. After that, Charlie began to leaf through the book. But he was somewhat surprised that there were no changes in the book. Charlie couldn't understand what was going on. He had dealt with the blue-skinned demon. Shouldn't there be some kind of reaction? Suddenly, Charlie's attention was distracted by something. Suddenly, Charlie turned over in the air. Some kind of ringing and strange music could be heard around him. And so, familiar walls appeared in front of Charlie. He was in his bed, in his homeworld at home. He is back. Suddenly, a man standing next to Charlie began shouting that a thief had broken into the house. But when the man realized that this was the owner of the house, namely Charlie, he fell silent and changed his face. Charlie looked at the man in confusion. I don't know how to explain this to him. Meanwhile, Old Man Lee headed towards the temple where Charlie spent the night. Old Man Lee began to call his bastard, but for some reason the boy did not answer. Suddenly, Old Man Lee saw the pools of blood in Charlie's armor. The old man stood in a stupor. What he saw left him speechless. Old Man Lee, amazed by the picture he saw, fell to the ground. The old man grabbed his head with his hands. He still couldn't believe that something had happened to the boy. He was so sorry that Charlie didn't listen to him. Meanwhile, Charlie began burying his grandfather's book. Charlie thought that it would be better for this book to remain with its deceased owner. Charlie thought about the fact that he would still prefer his old boring and quiet life to those rich, exciting adventures. Charlie muttered to himself that his grandfather should sleep peacefully, and that Charlie himself would return later. Charlie then mentally apologized to Old Man Lee, who remained in the other world. One day, Charlie received a call from the owner of the apartment he was renting. She shared with Charlie that her son was getting married soon. Charlie congratulated her. Then she added that she wanted to give the apartment that Charlie was renting for himself to her son and daughter-in-law, so she needed Charlie to move out in the next 2 days. The next day, Charlie walked down the street and thought that despite the fact that he had been in that world for a month, only a week had passed in his old world. Charlie was confused and upset. Not only was he kicked out of work, but he was also asked to vacate the apartment. Trouble clearly does not come alone. Because Charlie was talking about all this out loud, a woman standing next to him asked him if he was really looking for a place to live here. Charlie told the woman that it was true. It was not for nothing that he walked and looked around. The woman then asked Charlie what kind of house he was looking for. She said that if he told her this, she could show him the way. In response, Charlie gave the house number, thanking the woman for the offered help. It was the 21st house, the first block, 44. The woman and the other people around her looked at Charlie strangely. The woman scratched the back of her head. Judging by her behavior, Charlie's answer confused her. She was about to say something to Charlie, but suddenly, she was prevented from doing so. The realtor Charlie had talked to earlier pushed the woman away and introduced himself to Charlie, saying that he was the one who had talked to him the other day. His name is Phil Potter. Phil told Charlie that he had been waiting for him for a long time. Phil Potter then invited Charlie to follow him. The realtor pointed towards this apartment, located at the end of the corridor. Charlie was immediately surprised by something. There was a mirror with a broom from evil spirits. Charlie thought this was quite strange. Moreover, it was a 3-room apartment, and the price for it was only 1,000 yuan. It looked like some kind of trick. Seeing Charlie inspecting the broom from evil spirits, Phil Potter said that his father-in-law used to live here, and elders are prone to superstition. Charlie looked around the apartment again. The realtor went to the window and opened it, commenting that there had been no residents here for a long time, so it should be ventilated a little. Then the realtor drew Charlie's attention to the fact that the area was large and the furniture was good, and the price is so low only because of the urgent need for money. But suddenly Charlie took a closer look at what was in the room. There was some kind of spirit in the corner. There are also various ghosts located in other parts of the room. Charlie listened to the discussions of ghosts, Some of them discussed the fact that the realtor had set the price for such an apartment too low. Another noted that this was because it was infested with evil spirits. Afterwards, one of the ghosts asked the second how this time they would scare the people who came. The second suggested that this time he should use closing his eyes. The ghost thought that as soon as they realized their plan, people would shit themselves from fright. At first, the ghosts wanted to play a trick on the realtor, because it was he who always brought strangers to them. Meanwhile, Phil continued to impose on Charlie the idea that it would be very stupid to miss such an opportunity as buying this apartment. Phil said that such a good deal would be difficult to find anywhere in the world. But suddenly, Charlie interrupted the realtor's chatter, pointing his finger to the side. He pointed precisely in the direction of the dining room, in which the curtains swayed strangely. The realtor turned around with horror in his eyes to see what Charlie was pointing at. The realtor immediately began to make excuses and mumble something, saying that it was an ordinary draft. And in general, Phil Potter said that it was better for them to continue the conversation on the street. But suddenly one of the ghosts decided to carry out his plan. He flew up to the realtor and closed his eyes. Phil's frightened scream could be heard throughout the street. And in fact, Phil shit himself and lost consciousness from horror. Charlie gave the realtor a wide look and leaned over to check if he was okay. The ghosts, meanwhile, were actively discussing the fact that now it was Charlie's turn. And so one of the ghosts began to fly up to Charlie's back. The cunning ghost has already prepared his hands to close Charlie's eyes. But to the surprise of the ghost, Charlie suddenly turned around, looking the ghost straight in the eyes. The ghost, wanting to scare Charlie, asked the second ghost if Charlie could really see him. At this, the second ghost growled and said that his friend was just doing everything slowly, like a sleepy fly. Charlie glanced defiantly at one of the ghosts again, and then suddenly Charlie punched the ghost right in the face. The ghost leaned back from the blow. Charlie taught the offender a good lesson. After that, Charlie tried to bring realtor Phil Potter to his senses. The realtor woke up, not fully understanding what was happening, and then I asked Charlie if they were dead. Charlie was about to punch the realtor in the face, but the realtor said that there was no need for this because he had already completely come to his senses. The realtor said it was all a ghost. To this, Charlie replied that he thought that Phil felt unwell due to health problems, and when he dragged him to take him to the hospital, he woke up. The realtor was confused. Charlie at this point asked to draw up a contract. Charlie then commented that he liked the apartment, so he would take it. Now Charlie was officially a tenant of this apartment. The boy was immediately surrounded by spirits, saying that he was a monster and that they had died a terrible death. Some of the ghosts clutched their heads, arguing how unfair it all was, and some of the ghosts invited Charlie to join their ranks. However, Charlie calmly sat down on the sofa and took the remote control to turn on the TV. The ghosts began to hang around Charlie again, either out of curiosity or to scare him, but Charlie just yawned indifferently. At this point, the ghosts began to realize that their attempts to scare Charlie away were futile. One of the ghosts wanted to do something again, but his girlfriend suggested that Charlie understood magic. But it was one of the ghosts who said that they had already seen both monks and Taoists anyway. But his friend said that, unlike Charlie, those monks were crooks. A friend called him a coward. How is it possible that a crowd of ghosts cannot cope with one boy? And as soon as the self-confident ghost moved towards Charlie, the boy hit him in the face so hard that the ghost flew to the other end of the room. Charlie, who was fed up with the ghosts, showed them a willow branch. He warned that although this twig looks harmless, although it will not disperse their essence, it will still be very painful for them. The ghost that Charlie hit in the face grabbed his face because he was in so much pain. Charlie then picked up one of the talismans. He decided to use the talisman to get a better look at the ghosts. Charlie then counted a huge number of ghosts. In the 44th room, 10 men, 5 women, and 3 children. After counting their total number, Charlie asked them how they all ended up there. The ghosts looked at Charlie puzzled, afraid to say anything. Therefore, Charlie decided to point his finger at the bravest one, whom he hit in the face a minute ago, and ask him to answer the question posed. The ghost said in confusion that he couldn't say for sure. He only remembered that after death he could not even breathe, and simply flew around the city until he ended up in this room. In this room, surprisingly, his decaying soul, on the contrary, stabilized. But now you can't leave this room, you can only enter. But unfortunately, the Phantom did not remember everything that happened before. Charlie then turned to the other ghosts and asked if they had the same thing. Charlie was surprised by the ghost's words that they could enter and save their souls, but they could not leave. At this moment, Charlie was going through various memories in his head. Moreover, he remembered that Old Man Lee had once told him about the Spirit Land, also known as the Spirit Cage. This is a place for maintaining and nurturing spirits, which can become a trap for casual visitors. True, over time the ghosts will become insane and begin to absorb each other. This will contribute to the creation of a ghost king, and such a cage will no longer contain this king. In the world in which Charlie lived before, There had already been cases when such kings of ghosts broke free and caused a lot of trouble. Charlie realized that everything was not so simple. Whether it is a demon, spirit, ghost, monster, Taoist magic, or alchemy, nevertheless, at the core of everything is spiritual energy. But the energy of this world is extremely small and full of impurities. Only the special structure of the body allows a person to generate this energy himself. If not for it, Charlie would not have been able to use talismans with magic after the energy of that world ended. Therefore, if a modern person dies and does not immediately go to the afterlife, his soul will simply disappear. And because of this place is comparable to an oasis in the desert. Why did Charlie turn to the ghosts again, asking which of them had been here the longest? The bravest among them turned out to be just like that. He has been there for about 7 years. Charlie thought that this duration was very short. The house is already more than 20 years old. And if the spirit land was here originally, it would be impossible to build a house. Therefore, it appeared later. Charlie asked the ghosts to go about their business, offering to live in harmony while he himself continued his thoughts. Could there be anyone else there? Charlie went outside. Charlie walked past the river, holding a lantern in his hands which illuminated his path. Some strange sounds were heard around Charlie. The boy could not understand whether someone was next to him or whether it seemed to him. Suddenly, something crept up behind Charlie and grabbed him by the shoulder. Charlie jumped up in surprise. Charlie took the flashlight and pointed it at the creature that had sneaked up on him. In front of him stood some vile creature that looked like a zombie. The zombie approached Charlie and hissed at him. Charlie immediately took the talisman out of his pocket to deal with the frightening creature. But what happened discouraged Charlie. The talisman disintegrated into small particles. The zombie grabbed Charlie by the shoulders and threw him back. The zombie began to move more and more actively and confidently towards Charlie's face. And suddenly, Charlie opened his eyes and realized that he was lying in bed. Charlie realized that it was all a dream. Charlie was concerned that lately zombies had been constantly appearing in his dreams for no reason. And with each dream, they came closer and closer to Charlie. Suddenly, Charlie realized that what was probably happening was connected with his grandfather's yellow book. Not only is this strange book capable of transporting a person to the past, apparently, it can also manipulate us thousands of kilometers away. Charlie opened the door to leave his room, and I suddenly saw that ghosts had gathered behind the doors, smiling at Charlie with all their teeth. Charlie immediately asked them why they stood next to his door. The ghost said that since Charlie lives here, there is now electricity in the house, and the ghosts unfortunately had no entertainment for a long time, so one of them decided to turn on the TV and accidentally broke it. After the explanation, the ghost looked guiltily at Charlie. After some time, someone knocked on the front door. Realtor Phil Potter was standing on the threshold, either with the police or with the exorcists, or with the funeral service workers. The realtor was incredibly surprised by the fact that Charlie was still alive. Charlie said it looked like Phil had lost his mind. The realtor glanced at the living room. The TV looked perfect. The realtor asked Charlie if he had noticed anything strange in this apartment while he was in it. Charlie smiled and said that everything was fine, and then began to mutter something to his ghost roommates. The realtor became alarmed, not understanding who Charlie was talking to. The next day, the meeting was repeated. The realtor came to Charlie early in the morning, not alone, but together with his general director, Mr. Fay. The CEO told Charlie that he came to him to ask him for a small favor. Realtor Phil began his explanation. Their CEO, Mr. Fay, had recently received a project to build a facility on a certain piece of land, but the land turned out to be unclean. Charlie immediately thought it was about ghosts, so he turned to Charlie. But Charlie decided to ask them directly why this land was unclean. The CEO said he heard from Realtor Phil Potter that Charlie had real ability. The general director is having problems on the project, and in his words, he doesn't know what the reason is. And suddenly a ghost appeared there and began to chase him. The CEO said that he is not afraid of him, but his subordinates working there in the country are. Therefore, the project stopped halfway, but every day their team is incurring losses. Then CEO Fay added that if Charlie agreed to help him solve this problem, he would offer Charlie this amount. After saying these words, the CEO showed 5 fingers. Charlie immediately thought that we were talking about 500,000. The CEO scratched his head in confusion and said that this is not some kind of global project, but only a construction project related to agriculture, so he can offer a maximum of 50,000 yuan. Charlie rolled his eyes and began to think that it was quite funny that CEO Fay was talking about a small project, like a project to build some kind of Eiffel Tower. But Charlie understood that in his position, 50,000 was also very good. Moreover, at the job he found 2 days ago, Charlie is paid only 2,000. So after Charlie had this monologue in his head, he told the CEO that he agreed to the offer. After some time, Charlie was already sitting at his table and was putting some kind of sign on the parchment. Charlie wanted to manifest an evil conquering talisman. At this moment, the ghost cohabiting with Charlie loomed over him, curiously examining what Charlie was doing. Charlie at this moment thought that modern spiritual energy was too worthless to use, and Charlie is not even a member of the Endless Landscape sect. Charlie, unfortunately, does not have powerful strength. If it weren't for several pre-prepared talismans, Charlie wouldn't be going anywhere tomorrow. The Jade Dragon talisman was the old man's trump card. It was unclear how effective it would be in Charlie's hands. And the talismans for concentrating the spirit and protecting the home are only auxiliary, and clearly do not have destructive power. Charlie knew that if he encountered an aggressive spirit, he wouldn't have much choice. Of course, in conjunction with the talismans, Charlie will also need a good weapon. The sword that Charlie took from Old Man Lee should help him. Charlie swung his sword to look at it again. Charlie admired the feeling that the sword seemed to be an extension of Charlie's body. Suddenly, Charlie heard the buzzing of a mosquito behind him. He decided to test a couple of tricks on a flying mosquito. Charlie swung his sword again. Charlie got the taste for it so much that he immediately began swinging his sword around. Charlie's enthusiasm terrified his new ghost friends. Charlie thought that if he had had this sword earlier, his plans against the blue-skinned demon would not have been necessary. The sword is so good. With its help, it would not be difficult to defeat the blue-skinned demon in one blow. But obviously those aren't Charlie's skills, and he generally doubted that the sword was some kind of magical artifact or the sword of God. Maybe it was still due to the influence of that yellow book. Charlie remembered that in that book, about 72 transformations, there was just such a technique as fencing. This means that the technique of a special body structure was given to Charlie as a beginner, and the already mentioned fencing technique may have been given to Charlie for completing the task, as a reward. But be that as it may, life is very unpredictable. Charlie realized that he needed to be prepared to solve problems, and no matter in what way. The main thing is to get away with it. Suddenly Charlie saw a crowd of ghosts staring at him, so he asked them why they were all standing there and watching. One of the ghosts turned his back to Charlie and asked him to take a closer look at what he had done while practicing with the sword. Charlie saw the wounds on his back. Charlie was immediately ashamed that he was so carried away that he forgot about the ghost nearby. Charlie apologized and cunningly offered to make amends with chicken Taoist style. The ghosts, conferring, began to whisper among themselves. Ghosts are incorporeal. Obviously they can't eat. However, if the food has been specially processed and presented as an offering, then the spirit can enjoy the taste of the offered gift. And the so-called Charlie, Taoist food, is also called Dharma food. The wounded ghost flew up to Charlie and said that in addition, he was entitled to moral damages in the form of several chickens because the wounds inflicted on Charlie aesthetically spoiled the appearance of the ghost. Charlie smiled and said that it would be easy if the ghost did him a favor. The ghost asked how he could help. Charlie pointed somewhere with his finger, inviting them to go out and take a look on their own. Suddenly a realtor, Phil Potter, appeared in front of Charlie. Charlie glanced in his direction curiously. Charlie was surprised that the realtor was alone because they agreed that CEO Faye would be with them. Charlie asked Phil if anything had happened to the CEO. The realtor began to explain to Charlie that the general director really wanted to come, but it turned out that he had a lot of things to do and, due to his busy schedule, he would not be able to come to them join. Charlie said it was nothing, because the main thing was that nothing bad happened. Charlie then added that the sooner they started, the faster they would finish this thing. For some reason, the realtor became a little nervous and began to sweat. He said that they should just make it before nightfall, but there is one but. Suddenly, the realtor's attention turned to something strange and funny. Despite the fact that it had been sunny lately, Charlie had taken an umbrella with him. Charlie grinned suspiciously and explained that his friend was simply in the umbrella. Then Charlie invited the realtor to see him. The realtor was immediately scared. He said that after all, there was no need to disturb Charlie's friend. Charlie and realtor Phil Potter got into the car, and so after some time, Charlie and the realtor had already arrived at their destination. Charlie was amazed that the area of this place was huge, and it didn't really look like agriculture. 50,000 is too small an amount for such a scale of work. Suddenly, turning around, Charlie noticed that another black car was pulling up to park next to their car. The general director got out of the car, although he was not alone. He was accompanied by an elderly gray-haired man in a white coat. The CEO addressed him as Master. The CEO then glanced toward Charlie, noting that he was glad that he was there too. Then CEO Faye apologized for the long wait. They began to introduce Charlie to this Taoist master who was somewhat popular in the area, 65th generation of the Long Hunshan Mountain True Unity School, vice chairman of the Taoist Association of Yangcheng City, Master Chang. Charlie thought that he had never actually heard of this master. Now Charlie understood why the CEO was so late. He was just looking for a more reliable candidate, in his opinion. Charlie also noticed that the appearance of this old man was really impressive. Charlie was then introduced to Master Chan. Suddenly, the master looked to the side and started yelling that this place was really very dangerous. The general director immediately got scared and began asking the foreman what was going on. Master Chan began to state, "The terrain is unusual. The wind carries anger and the water is poisonous, like a battle between an insidious dragon and an all-consuming tiger." Charlie did not understand Master Chan's strange and miraculous reaction. The wind carrying malice, poisonous in water? At first, Charlie didn't realize what exactly he was talking about, but nevertheless, it all sounded very familiar to Charlie's ears. The general director rushed to the master with the words that it was immediately clear that this was a true master, because at first glance he noticed that something unclean was lurking in the depths. He asked the master what they should do now. The master asked the general director to leave the confusion, because there is still a way out of this situation. The Taoist carefully examined the scene to make a conclusion. The CEO told the master to follow him, and that he relied on Master Chan's knowledge and skills. Charlie immediately drew a small parallel. In intimidating by chattering, this master was no worse than Old Man Lee. The general director led his assistants towards the formation. He pointed to the building, saying that it all started there. He explained that the workers said they constantly heard a woman's voice, and at night they saw women. At first, the general director thought that his employees were just clueless fools. Over time, they even began to demand that work be stopped because of this ghost. Thinking that this was all nonsense, telling which employees simply want to get extra money, CEO Fei took his people with him and decided to check it all personally. And so that night, he met this ghost himself. Earlier, the general director did not believe in this, but after what he saw, he can no longer forget this situation. Master Chan ordered the guys to take his sacred relics and follow him. The master then asked CEO Fei not to be afraid, because it is easy to believe what you see in person. After which, the master added that today he wants to personally meet this evil spirit. It was starting to get dark outside. The people with them began to inspect this building. One of them turned on a flashlight, illuminating the walls of the building. Suddenly, realtor Phil Potter, who was standing to the side, was grabbed tightly by the arm. It was Charlie. Phil asked Charlie not to scare him like that again, and then added that he just wanted to find the switch because it was too creepy to be in the dark. Suddenly, within this building, someone screamed loudly. This immediately caught the attention of Charlie and Phil. It was one of the local workers who made a fuss, saying that somewhere off to the side he saw something. Everyone present immediately looked in the direction where the frightened worker pointed his finger. Before them, they saw the face of a vile and incredibly creepy creature. What he saw seriously frightened all his fellow travelers. The general director, employees, realtor, and oddly enough, even the so-called Master Chan. Charlie rolled his eyes and with an indifferent and bored expression on his face turned on the light. It turned out that what they saw in front of them was not a ghost, but just ordinary creepy graffiti. True realtor Phil Potter had already fallen to the floor out of fear, grabbed his head and muttered prayers under his breath. The CEO, who was already tired of the whining of his always cowardly employee, gave him a powerful kick and told him to stop yelling. Otherwise, Phil would actually attract a real ghost with his screams. The general director looked at this graffiti angrily and threatened out loud that as soon as he found out whose handiwork it was, he would throw this employee away. CEO Fei then asked Master Chang if everything was okay. Master Chan pretended to have everything under control and immediately noticed that this was an ordinary drawing, but Charlie was a little ahead of him by turning on the light. The CEO reintroduced Charlie to everyone, saying that although Charlie was young, he had real skills and craftsmanship. Suddenly, in front of their faces, everyone present again saw the terrible face of the monster. Everyone except Charlie started screaming at the top of their lungs again. Master Chang, with a trembling voice, began to mutter that he was a master of the School of True Unity from Mount Long Hunshan, and he would not allow the ghost to run rampant, and would not allow it to confuse people. Charlie grinned, thinking that this master was so nervous that it was absolutely obvious that he had no energy. But this is natural given this world, where it is difficult for ghosts to maintain shape, let alone practice. Charlie then suggested that maybe it wasn't ghosts at all. Charlie picked up the brick, throwing it towards the window where the ghost was visible. The window was broken, and behind it was a small, white, furry creature. Charlie examined the fluffy one carefully. Charlie stood in a stupor after such a situation. It seems it was an ordinary fox. Master Chan scratched the top of his head and then said that he also noticed something and suggested they go to the second floor. As Master Chan went up to the second floor, he began to explain to the CEO that it didn't seem to be a ghost, and taking into account the fact that the aura in the mountains is too dense and powerful, this is most likely the demon living in this building. And the start of construction probably awakened him. and the ghost that everyone saw was an illusion created by the demon himself. The workers began to whisper among themselves that in fact, after the founding of the country, it was forbidden to talk about demons and evil spirits. Also, one of the workers suggested that firstly, there is no ghost, but only a fox, and this master is actually a priest. Hearing their conversations, Master Chan began shouting that this was some kind of nonsense. Do they really think that behind the ghost drawing there really was an ordinary fox? According to Master Chan, that drawing is clearly the eyes of a demon. Master Chan added that they shouldn't worry anyway, because he had already seen the crux of the problem when he discovered the demon. And as long as the master was there, the demon wouldn't dare show up. Suddenly, a terrifying and loud laughter began to be heard in the building. The CEO became nervous, not understanding who was laughing. Realtor Phil asked the master where all his students accompanying them had suddenly gone. The master remained silent. Then everyone started asking him what was going on. The master asked not to worry, saying that he had everything under control. True, his words did not sound very confident and convincing. The CEO turned his attention hopefully from the master to Charlie. Charlie said it was time to get to work and then asked everyone to follow him. Everyone stopped, looking at the long corridor from the walls of which strange laughter was heard. The laughter didn't stop. Suddenly they saw that the man was laughing. Moreover, this was precisely the student of the so-called Master Chan. The CEO began to get more and more angry. Master Chan, meanwhile, began to justify this by saying that it was just a small misunderstanding. The CEO continued to persistently ask Master Chan why his student was trying to scare them. Master Chan moved closer to his student, taking him by the shoulder so that he turned around and explained his strange behavior. The student, giggling, began to say that there really was a ghost standing there somewhere. Master Chan suddenly realized that his words and the words of his students contradicted each other, so in order not to cause others to doubt their competence, he shut the student's mouth. Master Chan began to say that his student was simply too young, so sometimes he spoke all kinds of heresy. And after these excuses, he added that he had lost a lot of strength while in that place, so it was better to finish for today. Suddenly something scared everyone again. Someone suddenly turned off the lights on the first floor. The general director made a proposal that most likely the tension in that area is simply unstable. After which, he sent Realtor Phil to go and turn on the light. The realtor stood in bewilderment, clearly not eager to go into that darkness. CEO Fei yelled at him, saying that it was all nothing, and it was stupid to tremble with fear, so the CEO told the realtor to move. The realtor went down to the first floor. There was only darkness around. The guy went to the switch. The guy finally turned on the light and took a deep breath of relief. Luckily for him, nothing happened. CEO Fei and Charlie looked at Realtor Phil Potter with dismay. Something clearly surprised them. Phil Potter, not noticing that a terrifying ghost was standing behind him, looked towards the guys and smiled at them, not suspecting anything. Suddenly, Phil Potter glanced sideways at something standing next to him. It was the likeness of a woman with a nasty smile, black greasy hair, no pupils. Phil probably screamed to the whole city. Phil Potter immediately, as always, lost consciousness from fright. Charlie thought that this realtor was so timid that he immediately collapsed to the ground. But on the other hand, this was only beneficial, because he would not get in the way. The CEO hurriedly turned to Charlie, moving closer to him and asked him if he could get rid of the woman's ghost. Charlie cried out angrily that he doubted it was a ghost. Charlie was more inclined to think that it was someone playing a ghost rather than actually being one. Charlie suddenly jumped up to expose the creature. Charlie punched the creature in the face with a flourish. The creature grimaced from such an accurate and confident blow. Charlie, folding one hand into a fist and squeezing a sword in the other, decided for himself that there was definitely a person in front of him. The creature wanted to attack Charlie from behind, but Charlie immediately quickly repelled this blow, throwing the ill-wisher aside. The creature grimaced even more than before. His face looked really quite funny. Charlie now understood why he hadn't smelled the ghost in the first place. It simply wasn't a real ghost. This man, who had been pretending to be a ghost all that time, stood up, trying to understand what was happening. Charlie turned to his fellow travelers, asking them if anyone knew this woman. But the CEO suddenly warned Charlie that he should turn around. There was no one behind us anymore. Charlie was outraged and confused. Was he really mistaken? Meanwhile, everyone else ran away as fast as they could, afraid of running into the ghost. Charlie still couldn't understand what was going on. He looked around carefully, examining everything that surrounded him. At that moment, the realtor who had fallen earlier came to his senses. Charlie leaned over to Realtor Phil to ask the cowardly guy if he was okay. For some reason, Phil's head fell to the floor again in bewilderment. Charlie, meanwhile, decided to test his umbrella, which can be used to plant ghosts. His ghost companion flew out of the umbrella. Charlie asked him to check if there was another ghost near them. The ghost looked around and said that he didn't see anything strange around him. Charlie became even more confused. Maybe that creature really is a demon. Suddenly, the guys saw the same woman who at that moment was greedily chewing a piece of raw meat. The ghost looked at this woman with recognition. Even at first, he didn't believe that everyone was calling her a ghost. The ghost touched the tip of her nose. After this, the ghost discovered some small hairs there. Charlie took the woman by the shoulders. The ghost said that although the woman looked like some kind of local crazy woman, in fact, she was simply obsessed with something. Charlie looked at the hairs his ghost friend found. It was similar to the fur of the fox they had already seen. The following events took place in the forest behind the buildings. Charlie walked over to the CEO, Master Chan, and his student lying there. They were all unconscious. They looked funny. The only CEO woke up, but at the same time began to become very delusional. He turned to a certain venerable spirit I beg him not to touch. In return, the CEO was ready to give all his savings to the spirit. To help the CEO come to his senses, Charlie placed a spirit concentration talisman on his forehead. Charlie asked the CEO to wake up quickly. Finally, CEO Fei began to gradually come to his senses and was already able to recognize Charlie. Then Charlie and his ghost friend decided to check if the others were okay. Starting to come to their senses thanks to the talismans, no one could understand what had happened at all. Everyone was in some kind of confusion. Meanwhile, Master Chan continued to lie unconscious on the ground. It was somehow strange. Even a talisman and a slap in the face could not bring Master Chan back to his senses. Master Chan landed on the grass again. The master must have expended too much spiritual energy, although over time he will still wake up. The fact that he still had not woken up was due not to the fact that he actually could not do it, but to the fact that he, in fact, simply did not want to make the effort to realize it. 10 minutes later, Master Chan seemed to wake up. Charlie turned to his recently awakened fellow travelers, saying that it looked like the creature had escaped, so they had better return. Charlie also asked them not to forget to take with them the woman they met, and Phil Potter. But CEO Fei, noting that there were no problems yet, invited Charlie to go with them. But to the surprise of the others, Charlie was not ready to leave this problem unresolved. Charlie continued on his way with his ghost friend. His name is Derek in the forest. Ghost Derek pointed his finger at Charlie, asking him to look straight. The picture they saw amazed both Charlie and Derek. They witnessed strange creatures, similar in appearance to foxes, performing some kind of ritual. One of the so-called foxes brought some kind of plate towards the moon. The rest of the foxes, meanwhile, began to howl at the moon. Moonlight was like water to them. But while Charlie was staring at the foxes, they suddenly noticed this and turned in his direction. The direction of the wind also immediately changed as soon as they sensed Charlie's presence. Growling and angry creatures headed towards Charlie and Derek. Charlie confidently said out loud that since they had already noticed him, there was no point in hiding anyway. Charlie addressed these creatures, asking them not to waste his time and confront him. The creatures jumped up, starting to attack Charlie. Charlie swung his sword right in front of the fox. The fox immediately began to howl in pain. Only the white fox, which the guys had seen earlier in that building, remained intact. It was immediately clear from the fox's gaze that she was confused. Charlie didn't understand if they didn't even have real skills. It turns out that foxes have only illusions. The white fox bent over a bowl of moonlit water. Charlie also looked into this bowl. The white fox was quite cunning as they say in the legends. It appears that she gave Charlie this bowl in exchange for her life. Charlie said that if the white fox and her companions did not create more problems, then he would not touch them. The fox purred contentedly. Charlie thought in his head that since they didn't hurt people, they weren't evil. That lunar liquid smelled fragrant, just like aromatic wine. She began to attract Charlie more and more. Charlie could not resist such a temptation, so he decided to take a sip of the moon water that was in that bowl. The taste was so delicate, as if you were not drinking anything, but at the same time, coolness spread throughout your whole body. And most importantly, this mysterious drink really increased energy. Charlie was shocked at how wonderful this drink was. Charlie handed the bowl to Derek, inviting him to try it too. Derek glanced curiously and playfully at the contents of the bowl. Derek immediately began drinking the moon water with enthusiasm. Derek said it was an awesome drink because it was even more nutritious for spirits. One might say, a real treasure. Charlie picked up the now empty plate and began to twirl it in his hands, wanting to take a closer look at it. Suddenly, Charlie took a closer look at the bowl. Oddly enough, there was some kind of inscription right there. Charlie tried to make out what was written there. The following was written on the bottom of the bowl. The shimmering moonlight fills my cup. The lunar cup can turn the light of the moon into wine. It was necessary to read these 6 words on the moonlit night of abundance. Only once in one night. Charlie became curious as soon as he said those words, and the information about them immediately popped up in Charlie's mind. Charlie carefully smelled the top of the white fox's head and asked her where she got such a cup from. In response, the white fox purred contentedly. Charlie and Derek continued on their way. Meanwhile, CEO Fei was chatting with a sweet and friendly girl at the bar in the agricultural inn. Suddenly, Charlie came through the hotel doors. The CEO immediately approached Charlie, asking how he was doing. In response, Charlie asked him not to worry because he had already gotten rid of the problem. The CEO then cried out in satisfaction that this was simply amazing news, and considering that Charlie had done a great job, he should go and rest. The CEO allocated the best room for Charlie. Charlie immediately fell onto the bed. Charlie, as always, began to think about his own things. The information that came to him after he looked at the bottom of the bowl popped into his head. That moon bowl might have been a master's treasure, but due to the depletion of spiritual energy in this world, he ended up dying trapped in the mountain. But the room Charlie saw looked strange, as if it was squeezed into a mountain. Then Charlie tried to distract himself from all these thoughts because he already wanted to sleep. Charlie had worked all day, so he was genuinely curious if he would get paid extra for his work. But as soon as Charlie closed his eyes, his imagination began to draw strange pictures again. He saw himself, and above him some kind of demonic resemblance with a strange appearance, an invisible body, bright red eyes, and huge fangs. Suddenly, Charlie heard the door creak. Someone opened it slightly. The zombie he had already seen in his dreams bent over him. Charlie, meanwhile, continued to lie calmly. The zombie began to tear everything around and disturb Charlie's sleep. Charlie's eyes widened. He saw in front of him a vile, huge, rotten, toothy, and terrible creature. Could this zombie have come straight out of Charlie's dream? Charlie leaned to the side to fumble with his hand for the cup and his sword. The zombie, meanwhile, continued to head straight towards Charlie. Charlie was shocked. Suddenly, Charlie put the moon cup under Zombie's hand. The zombie instantly jumped to the side, destroying everything in its path. Charlie's sword and gutted furniture lay on the floor. Fortunately, the artifact was not damaged. Even through a steel plate, the kinetic energy would crush Charlie. Charlie then thought that if he had to face the zombie with his bare hands, Charlie would die in the first skirmish. Therefore, Charlie decided not to risk it and took the moon cup and ran as fast as he could from that place. The zombie immediately noticed the fugitive. Charlie hurriedly ran out of his room, heading towards the reception. The receptionist didn't understand what the noise was. Charlie shouted to her that it was time to sound the fire alarm, otherwise everyone would die. The girl was shocked and shouted that she did not want to meet ghosts again. Charlie corrected her. It was not a ghost, but a real zombie. An alarm began to be heard in front of the rural house. Master Chan and his student had already approached the exit. They were later joined by Realtor Phil and his new travel companion Sheila, whom they found in the building. Phil told her not to rush around the bush. He said that if he could have foreseen that she would cause so much trouble, he would never have agreed to bother with her. Charlie immediately thought that perhaps Realtor Phil Potter had a rather kind heart, after which Charlie began to remember whether anyone was left in the rural house. Everyone was next to him except General Manager Fei and the other counter-employee. Suddenly, a frightened, charming, and half-naked girl ran out of the village house and called for help. All the guys immediately stared at her. It was the second employee named Lucy. Charlie walked closer to her to ask where CEO Fei was. Lucy shouted that he had fallen into the clutches of a zombie, so she asked to save him. Meanwhile, CEO Fei was lying in his room blindfolded and his legs tied to the bed. He was calm because of the blindfold, he did not understand what was happening. CEO Fei was sure that Lucy was in the room with him now, who was about to improve her qualifications. CEO Fei, lying with a satisfied face, promised Lucy that he would promote her house manager. The CEO then shouted, "Come to me, my sweetie," and grabbed the zombie by the waist. The zombie had already started drooling on the CEO's face, but Charlie decided to thwart the monster's plans by piercing him through with his sword. True, Charlie relaxed early, because the zombie watched with mockery Charlie's attempts to defeat him. The zombie began to move aggressively towards Charlie. Charlie was very indignant because Master Chan gave him this sword with the words that the sword was made of peach wood, which has special powers. Only his words, as always, turned out to be nonsense. Meanwhile, the CEO tried to remove the blindfold from his eyes while turning to Lucy. Having removed the bandage, the CEO witnessed Charlie trying to deal with a huge and disgusting zombie with his bare hands. Charlie looked exhausted at the CEO and told him to run away from here to save himself. The general director, screaming and in his underwear, ran out of the building in fear. Lucy and everyone else were already waiting for him on the street. CEO Fei burst into tears with the hope that Charlie would be okay and that the zombie wouldn't touch him. Suddenly, Charlie, as always, was able to surprise all the people. He jumped straight out of the window, breaking it into small fragments. The CEO was overjoyed by Charlie's sudden appearance, no matter how strange this appearance was. The CEO blushed and sighed with relief with words of gratitude. If not for Charlie, he would have died long ago. Charlie asked what use gratitude was to him. First they talked about ghosts, then demons appeared, and now zombies. Charlie waved his finger menacingly in the CEO's face and said that he would wait for additional payment. The CEO nodded gratefully. After this, the CEO asked Charlie what they should do with this zombie. After all, the downtime of an object still costs money. Charlie began to examine the entire area surrounding them. Charlie arrogantly and confidently took the steel cables into his hands. One idea popped into his head, although it was very risky. It was Charlie's style. Charlie, standing in the hotel corridor, began to finger the cable in his hands. He was surrounded by his friends. Together, they tried to build a plan that would help them defeat the zombies. CEO Fei was most worried about the fact that it might not work. Meanwhile, Master Chan continued to try to excuse himself from carrying out the plan. He scratched the back of his head and said that the plan indeed sounded reasonable. However, his spiritual powers had not yet been restored, so he could not participate in the implementation of the plan. But the general director did not appreciate the reaction of the so-called master. Due to the fact that he was already tortured by this lazy, nonsense, and cowardly grandfather, he slapped him in the face and ordered him to do whatever Charlie said. Otherwise, he will not receive the money. Charlie picked up the sword, approaching the place where the zombie was. Zombies began to creep from the corridor. The zombie was desperately hiding, trying to be careful. Meanwhile, Charlie was thinking that his grandfather's yellow book was constantly giving Charlie difficult problems. Charlie suddenly deliberately cut his hand, then immediately thought that the blood of a spiritual energy holder must be very tasty. Smelling the smell of blood, Zombie looked closely at Charlie. Charlie specifically ran in a certain direction so that the zombie would run after him, following the smell of blood. The zombie actually moved as fast as he could towards Charlie, preparing to grab him. Charlie at the same time tried to carefully look behind him without slowing down in order to keep track of the zombies. Charlie saw that the zombie was rapidly continuing in pursuit of him. Charlie's legs were already hurting from running so fast. Suddenly, Charlie turned to look again at the zombie catching up with him and saw a terrifying sight. The zombie, as it turned out, could also jump high to attack its victim. Charlie suddenly stumbled and lost his way. The zombie pushed Charlie. Charlie instantly flew to the side, hitting the wall hard. Charlie narrowed his eyes at the zombie who was about to attack the boy and tried to wipe the blood flowing down his chin. Suddenly, Zombie jumped up to Charlie and grabbed his throat tightly. The zombie began to aggressively and persistently strangle Charlie. Charlie found it difficult to resist the monster. Charlie looked in the direction where everyone else was supposed to be standing and indignantly asked them what they were even waiting for. Suddenly, the guys grabbed each other, and CEO Fei, who was standing at the beginning, began to pull the end of the rope. With all their might, they pulled the cable toward themselves more and more persistently and confidently. This was done so that the unsuspecting zombie would fall into a trap. Due to the fact that this cable was wrapped around the legs of this ugly zombie, and the guys were pulling the cable in their direction, they hung the zombie upside down, thereby paralyzing his movements. CEO Fei smiled contentedly and began to run towards Charlie and the zombies, commenting that Charlie and his skills were, as always, magnificent and unsurpassed. He was very happy that everything worked out for them and was crowned with success. The closer CEO Fei was to Zombie, the more insidious Zombie's face became. Suddenly, the zombie laughed and waved his huge and smelly paw in front of CEO Fei's face, the claws on which looked like a murder weapon. Master Chan, Realtor Phil Potter, and Master's apprentice continued to try their best to hold the cable. Charlie asked the CEO to run to the guys to help them hold the cable holding the zombies. Charlie warned him that it wasn't over yet. CEO Fei nodded obediently and ran to carry out the instructions of the commander of the entire process, Charlie. Meanwhile, Charlie was preparing for the culmination of his plan. The zombie at this moment continued to hang upside down, opening its vile and terrifying mouth to growl and scream. A few minutes later, Charlie already had a new weapon in his hands, a huge and scary chainsaw.